Here in Matthew chapter 6. Let's begin reading in verse 1, and then we'll dive right into it. So Matthew chapter 6 and verse 1, starting in verse 1 through verse 4. Beware of doing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. Therefore, when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be glorified by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. Whenever you're giving to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be done in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Okay, so to begin, as I was kind of mentioning just a second ago, where we're at. Let's talk about that for a second. So, like I said, Sermon on the Mount. It's got an intro, and then kind of famously, the conclusion is the one who builds their house on the rock. Rains come down, floods come up. Building house on the rock is kind of the conclusion. We're just going to abbreviate it. That's how you spell it. All right. So introduction and conclusion. And the intro is kind of where he talks about who this kingdom that he's bringing about is coming to. He says, blessed are these 9 different blessed ones, the Beatitudes. And then it kind of also launches into the type of people that the kingdom is, when they're living it out, is like salt and light. We talked about that. And then it launched into the righteousness, the greater righteousness that Jesus is bringing about through this sermon. That was kind of like part 1, and so we'll just tell it the greater righteousness. This is kind of like part 1. Then where we're at is part 2 here in the middle. And so this is the first 4 verses of what we just read. Is this middle section where he goes through 1, 2, 3 different types of good works, practices. Title of the lesson. If you want to look down in your Bibles, the first one that we read from, verse 2, it says, when you give to the poor. And then look at verse 5, when you pray. And then look at verse 16, whenever you fast. So praying or giving, praying, and fasting, these 3 parts in the middle, and I'll just title this one the works. After he's talked about how we're supposed to be doing these things from the heart, he then breaks down into how that's embodied and acted out. And then lastly, in this third section, I've kind of wrestled with how to title it, and this is not my discovery or anything. Other people have outlined the sermon this way. But the best I can do, thinking about it, is you've got from the heart. He's talking about the greater righteousness from the heart, living it out, acting it out, and then trusting. All these last teachings in this third section are really about trust. This is in end of chapter 6, more or less. If you look in verse 19, where he talks about treasures in heaven, don't worry. And then chapter 7, don't judge one another. The plank and the eye versus the speck in the eye. And then ask, seeking, and knocking is where that section kind of concludes. And so all of them, kind of the unifying thing is our trusting in God as we walk through and we act out the greater righteousness through our works in our life. And maybe by the end of this series, I'll have a better drawing that I can put up on the slides or something. But that's just kind of where we're at. We're right here in the middle. It's kind of we're zooming in right into the center of the sermon. And then also, you could even break down these 1, 2, 3 parts into even a more central part. And then in the middle of the middle is the Lord's Prayer. If you look in your Bibles, which is not tonight's teaching, but it's just kind of we're doing this weeks and chunks apart, but they would have been hearing this all at once. And so it's just kind of always important to take a moment, pause, and just remember where we're at in this journey through the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus. And so tonight we're beginning that middle section about these works, and it's right here in the very heart. And what Jesus is doing is he's kind of continuing off of that first flow of thought in the first section, where it's the greater righteousness that's supposed to be the transformation of the heart. And it's not just about doing the commands, don't murder or don't commit adultery, but it's don't even be angry, murderously angry. Don't even put value judgments on people's lives through name calling. Don't lust at someone with your eyes and cultivate that. It's he's calling us. Sorry, I thought that engine it had the same tune of a tornado siren for a second there. When I heard it, I was everybody run. No, sorry. We must press on. Rabbit trail brain. Sorry about that. But right here in the center of the sermon, Jesus is now talking about how we're embodying this greater righteousness in actuality through these are in his day kind of the core acts of service and worship: giving to the poor, praying, and fasting. And so the first thing, when I was meditating on this paragraph, and I wanted to spend some time just on this introduction because it does cover one of the practices of giving to the poor, but it kind of it establishes this repetition. And that's what he says in verse 1, chapter 6 and verse 1. Beware of doing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them, otherwise you will have no reward from your Father who's in heaven. He kind of repeats that throughout each of these. And then the question that came to my mind is what's going on with that phrase there in chapter 6, verse 1? Because what about letting our light shine before others? Didn't we just read in the introduction? Look back at chapter 5. Chapter 5 and verse 16. Let your light shine in such a way that they all may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven. And then chapter 6, verse 1. Beware of doing your righteousness before men. You're wait, hold on. So which one is it? Before we dive into that and kind of unearth it, I just want to do a little case study, because what Jesus is doing here is he's presenting two things that seem to be in contradiction with one another, but it's training us on how to learn. If you will, hold your finger in Matthew 6. We'll be right back. But if you want to turn and look at this, go to Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs 26. This is one of my favorite examples of this, because it's almost kind of funny when you're just reading through this chapter in Proverbs and you read these verses back to back, and if you're reading it aloud especially, you're well, hold on a minute, because let's just look at it. Proverbs chapter 26, begin in verse 4. It says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you yourselves also be like him." Verse 5. "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." Wait a minute. Which one am I supposed to do? Do I not answer a fool? It's literally verbatim. Do I answer a fool according to his folly, unless I also become like him? Or do I not answer the fool according to his folly? Which one is it? Do I do it or do I not do it? If you want to head back to Matthew 6, we're just referencing this here. But what the book of Proverbs is a collection of wisdom literature. And this is a classic way to train someone in wisdom. You give them two things. You give them two options. And that's the information. Answer the fool according to his folly, or don't answer the fool according to his folly. And what happens is when we enter a situation where we're hit with the choice of answering a fool or not answering a fool according to his folly, and then we have to use and gain wisdom when we act out and we choose to listen to one of those choices. It trains us in the distinction. So what seemingly is and I guess I can erase my rough little outline here, but what seems like two contradictory statements, and this is actually, I've literally heard people try to say these are contradictory, and I'm the people, this book wasn't written by idiots. They can read, and reading comprehension a verse right next to each other. It's there must be something deeper that's going on there. And it's it's the way I've described it is it's like a surround sound system. Whenever you have, and sorry, I keep remembering that I need the recording on the mic when I've gone back and re-listened to my sermons. Whenever I wander over here, it's kind of becomes, so I'm trying to stay over here as much as I can. But whenever you have a surround sound system, how does that work? So you have one speaker, usually a sound bar on your TV, and your TV is just putting out noise. But if you have two extra speakers for a surround sound, what it does is say that you're watching a movie where a ship or a plane flies over, is the sound goes. That's going to be a good sound clip on the sermon. But you can almost feel the plane passing over in the movie as its sound moves from one side to the other. That's why it's called surround sound. It gives you depth to the movie that you're watching. And that's kind of what these two teachings in the book of Proverbs are like. There's a person here, and they have to make a choice between wisdom and folly. Do they answer the fool according to his folly, or do they not answer him? And these two teachings of the Proverbs come to this person, and then when they actually enter a situation where they have to decide, they become wiser through that. Because they have both sides of the perspective, and it gives them depth to the teaching, and now they can choose to walk through that pathway by holding both of these in their hands. Is this making sense? Because, like, we're going to get to a teaching a little later in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talks about a narrow way. And, a narrow way is a gap between two spaces that you have to kind of squeeze in through. And that's what this is like kind of leading us into, is we have to become wise people to walk on that narrow way, to choose between the right and the wrong decisions in certain paths and complicated situations. Because one way you could see all of the Bible is wisdom literature. It's training us how to be wise people and to reflect the image of God out into the world. And so what is going on here? But Jesus is giving us wisdom. And also don't stop reading that verse, right? It like seeing before, like do your righteousness before men, beware of doing that. Because what did he say is the reason? He says the reason you need to beware of doing your righteousness before men is the reason why you're doing your righteousness before men. Look at what he says. Beware of doing your righteousness before men to be seen, to be noticed by them. Again, this is a heart check moment. Like Jesus is teaching us wisdom by kind of giving us these two sides of when we do our righteousness. But then also it's a heart check moment. Is why are we doing the things that we do? Why are we in this situation? Why do you give to the poor? Why do you pray? Why do you fast? What's the reason why that you're doing something? It's a heart check. It's a moment where he's saying, and again, the things that he's been saying the entire time, right? Look back on the last little section of teaching. We broke it up into like two sections where he did the first three commands, where he says, you've heard it said, don't murder. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. You've heard it said, whoever sins away, let him give him a certificate of divorce. And then what did he do each time with those commands? Is he was questioning, why are you following that command? It's not enough to just do the thing. What's most important is why you're doing the thing. He's like, we got to go deeper. We got to press into that greater righteousness. Because the Pharisees of his day, like they would just say it's fine as so long as you're not committing adultery. Just like, cultivate whatever sort of lustful thoughts you want. And it's like, you can like marry willy-nilly so long as you give them a certificate of divorce. And Jesus is like, no. Like we've got to go back. We've got to go deeper. Like we've got to have that greater righteousness. And then he concludes that section of teaching with verse 48 of chapter 5. You are to be perfect or complete as your heavenly Father is perfect. Like that's a high calling. But that's the calling that like Jesus is raising the bar to in this Sermon on the Mount. And so if you will, let's keep going forward and let's start breaking down this section of verses. So first he says in verse 2, like when you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they will be glorified by men. He says, truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. So first off, this word hypocrite. This one has kind of become so famous through the widespread of the biblical text that it's kind of like lost its original meaning. The word hypocrite just means actor. I don't know if you all have heard this one before, but like we've taken like the Greek word and we've just spelt it with English letters. It's something along the lines of like hypocrites, something like that. And it just means literally an actor. And side note, little kind of nerdy thing, but when I was reading about this word, it's interesting because Jesus lived in the vicinity of a very large theater that would have built around the time when he was a child. And, what was Jesus' father's profession and what was his profession? Like usually we say carpenter, but it just means like a craftsman or a tradesman. So like don't mean to burst anybody's bubble if you have like a painting of Jesus, like, with like one of the like wood scraper things. But he probably was just like, there's no wooden structures in the land of Galilee. Barely at all. There's like a few, but like primarily what they build with is rocks because there are no big trees in that area. And trees were expensive to import. So he probably was like just a regular like stonemason or construction type worker. Like to translate it to today, he was just someone who like was a construction worker, like blue collar builder kind of job. And there was a very large building project in his region when he was a child, and it was a theater. And so like this would have, it's just interesting that would have been in the vicinity of when Jesus would have been just working with his father in everyday life as a worker and a construction worker and a stonemason. That's a little sidestep, but he uses this analogy to describe these people who are doing their righteousness to be seen by others as actors, or the word is hypocrites, but it's an actor. Someone who literally, like in the plays during their day, what an actor would do is they would put on a mask. You think of like the classic image of like a tragedy and a comedy. And there's the happy mask and the sad mask that the actors would wear as they would go out and perform. That's what he's talking about here. The people who put on a mask and then just like go out and do the things. And then they're like play acting. They're a showman. Like that's the analogy that Jesus is going for here when he talks about these hypocrites. But where are they play acting? Well, they're going out in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be glorified by men. And he says, assuredly they have received their full reward. Which is also another thing to note, is like, Jesus is very aware that there's like an awarding, like an awarding typeness. That is not a word. There's a type of reward that is received in doing good things. Like this is something that's like real, like it's just how the world even sees good deeds. It's like it's something that should be praised and awarded. But Jesus is like, if you're doing it and your heart motivator is only so that you get a reward, he says that's your whole thing. Like that's your whole reward. There it is. Like you get it. You got it. I hope you're happy because that's all you're getting. And so what he says is they have received their reward in full, but the thing that they're doing when they receive that reward from men is they're robbing themselves actually of the true reward. I mean, like this is like so rampant today in like the social media world, because you can like post about everything, like you can just like tell everything that you're doing like at every moment and just like let everyone know how awesome your life is and how like awesome you are and all of that. And it's like, we kind of like laugh or chuckle about that, but like that's the reality of the world we live in. And it's a world where you can put on whatever mask you want for the world to see on a virtual space. And then if someone doesn't like actually know you, you can just display it however you want. Like, again, these teachings, man, like of the Sermon on the Mount, it's like on the ground. And as I've said multiple times, none of us are going to be escaping unscathed by the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. But this is what we're actually robbing ourselves of, is the true reward, which is like the approval of our Father in the heavens. And we'll get to that in a minute. But then Jesus goes on in the next verse, in verse 3. He says, when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And we'll talk about that in a second. But think about, again, what they're doing when they're seeking that full reward from men, from mankind, is a way that I heard it described, which was, if you wanted to make a note of it, I have it in the margins of my Bible as well. It's just kind of been helpful to me. But it's the idea of like, the phrase was premeditated glorification. We think about like premeditated murder. And what these people, the actors, the hypocrites were doing was a type of premeditated glorification, orchestrating things so that when the moment comes, you're ready to receive your reward in full, kind of thing. And that's what they were doing, is a type of premeditated glorification. To counter that, what Jesus says, the type of people like we're supposed to be training ourselves to be, is the ones that you don't know what your left hand, or your left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. So, what's going on with that turn of phrase? Well, can any of you tie your shoe? Show of hands. How many people can tie your shoe? I see one in the back. Oh, what? Everybody. Good. I'm so glad that all of you know how to tie your shoe. If you were having a conversation with me, like for those of you who are more experienced shoe tiers, not the youngest in the room maybe, but for my more experienced shoe tiers out there, if I'm having a conversation with you, and like say we're walking along like a pathway along the sidewalk, and like you have to stop mid-conversation because you realize your shoe's untied, and you're telling me a story or something, would you have to be like, one moment, and then you could pick up your story again? Like, no. You could probably just prop up your foot on like a fire hydrant or something, keep talking, and then like you tie your shoe, and then you keep on walking along the way without missing a beat. I think the image of what's going on here that Jesus is saying is this is an automatic habit. Like, when does our left hand not know what our right hand's doing? It's when we're doing something that we're so familiar with that it's like it's mindless work. You don't even have to think about it as you're doing it. And what Jesus is saying, these deeds of giving to the poor, is like, your left hand's not even going to know what your right hand is doing. Like, that's kind of a hard mindset to get into, because it's kind of like, don't think of a pink elephant. Or don't think of LA in a pink shirt, I guess, or whatever. But like the moment you say that, it comes to mind, right? And so it's like, well, how do I do these deeds without immediately thinking about the fact that I'm doing something that's good? Well, this is the gift of obscurity, and the practice of obscurity that I think we kind of maybe need to reclaim in our very like broadcasted culture. Just do things and never mention it. Or never mention it to anyone. There was an artist, I forget the guy's name, but he wrote a letter to young students. And what he described, he says, write a poem, crumple it up, and immediately throw it in the trash and don't tell anyone about it. And he says, and in doing so, your creative spirit will grow. I think something like that is also what Jesus is calling us to do, but for our souls and for our eternal spirit. Is like when we do a good deed, and it's something that no one else sees, it's something that's just between us and our Father who's in heaven, our soul grows to become more like Christ. Because it's not about anything else but by the one who sees in secret. And so like intentionally, like we might have to premeditated glorification is what the actors did, the Pharisees, the hypocrites. We might have to do a little premeditated unglorification. I'm just making up words tonight. But you get the point. It's like intentionally creating a space where I'm doing something that I know will please the Father. And no one knows about it. And no one's ever going to know about it. And not even in like a little passing like, I was blessed by this moment I was able to do the other day kind of thing. Like, no. No one know about it. And in doing so, our soul like will grow more towards the Father. So, I think, I missed one of my points on my little thing here. The print's small because my phone glitched up and my like dual monitor that I keep up here is very small print. And these glasses, I've had these since 8th grade. So they are I think they're like over a decade old. So it's about time. Anyways, it's a little hard to see sometimes on my thing. But basically what he's training us is to do things that then are like unnoticed even by ourselves. Like when I out there, like when I was a prime runner, when I was like training, I wasn't thinking constantly about how my feet are hitting the ground or how my pace is and my breathing rhythm is. It was just second nature because I had been training myself to be ready for when the race comes to perform. And that's what this right hand, left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing is talking about. Is we are so, this way of being is so integrated into who we are and our bodies and our soul and our spirit that it almost goes unnoticed. Like it's just second nature. There's someone that needs, I give. There's a time of prayer, I pray. And like these actions just flow forth from the heart. They're not motivated by a need to be praised by others. And so that's kind of what I think is happening with this phrase here. And then lastly, doing what is right in the sight of our Father, or our Abba, who is in heaven. Verse 4, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. As we've been like going along with this sermon, there's this other theme that's kind of been like popping up in my mind, another teaching of Jesus, which is like to enter the kingdom of heaven. What are you supposed to become like? Like a child. And I think there's kind of a childlike innocence and desire to like this teaching that he's saying. Because like I'm not a father, I'm not even married. But like I have little cousins, you know, and like I'm the older cousin, so like it's kind of I'm the cool cousin, just in their eyes, no one else's. But whenever we're like at Thanksgiving is coming up, and Lord willing I'll get to see them. Whenever we're like hanging out, you know, like we're like running around, and they like I have like a collection of like Nerf weapons, and not the guns, but like I don't know if y'all know, but Nerf had like a series where they made like battle axes and swords and shields and knives. I see someone nodding, my man. But like that was like I love those. Like it was like you could just like whack people with them. And whenever they come over to our house, they love playing with them, and then they love like kind of like I would like flip my sword in the air. And I was like, could like twirl it and then catch it, like I was in like color guard or something. But like it was like the little thing that they were like, whoa, Nelly. And then they're like, Andrew, like watch this. Like throws it in the air and just goes like over there. And I'm like, wow, like that's awesome. Then he like picks his ear and eats his earwax, and you're like, whoa, what's going on? But it's a childlike desire in that moment that all they needed from me was just to like see what they were doing, like just to like observe and be like, that's awesome. Like you're doing what I was just doing. That's so cool. Kind of, you were doing what I was doing. But in our like current day and age, which the stats are different in the church among Christians, but like my generation, I'm technically Gen Z, but like my generation and the generation before me came from the most like divorced households. After the sexual revolution of like, I can't remember which generation that was, but their generation, the millennial generation, like the broken households through just the chaos of the sexual revolution, it led to so much brokenness. And that leads to a lot of young children who don't have a fatherly voice in their life, and the effects that has, like we are still, like there's like hard evidence studies on these topics, is like the effect that has is immeasurable almost, to like how a child grows up and is reared and is able to like function properly in society. The scars that leaves is tragic. But what Jesus is saying here is we have like an Abba. The word here is Abba, your father. It's the common word for the father figure. It's your dad. He sees you. And like when he sees you do things just out of like joy of doing it for him and no one else knows about it, it's like that's my son. Like that's my daughter. And this is the exact thing that Jesus heard from him just a few chapters earlier in chapter 4. That's my son. And in him I'm well pleased. And like when all of us, when we do things in this moment of baptism, like we're mimicking Jesus' life, his death and his resurrection. And it's also kind of like, so Jesus' death, this could be an hour-long teaching, but Jesus' death and his resurrection is parallel to, especially in the Gospel of Matthew, his baptism by John the Baptist. And in that moment, when both of them are moments where he's fully aligned with the Father's will. And the Father, in a literal voice, speaks over him at the baptism, but you could also see it happening at the crucifixion as well. He's doing what is well-pleasing. In fact, in Isaiah 53, when he's talking about the crucifixion, it says, it pleased the Lord to crush him. It's the same word. It was well-pleasing to the Lord to bruise him. In the crucifixion, and then in his baptism, that's my son in whom I'm well-pleased. And when all of us, like we do things for our Father, that's from a heart that seeks to serve him, like, that's my child. And I'm well pleased. Like, that's what he says to us. That's what he tells us. And our Abba, who's in heaven, hears us. And so, yeah, as we close it up right here, right now, that's a wonderful blessing that we're invited into. And you can do that tonight as well. I said I'm wrapping up. But I want to go on a tour of a few passages that really, like, this teaching that Jesus is talking about like our heart motivation in these acts of service and worship, it's like Jesus is speaking this in a condensed, like, way in this, like, structured and beautiful sermon. But, like, he's a good Bible student. Like, he was raised on the scriptures, right? Like, this is something that he also learned. Like, this is something that he is condensing down and then teaching. But, like, I just want to, like, go through a tour of passages real quick. You don't have to, like, turn to every one of them because we're just going to be cruising through them. But, like, just listen to the emphasis. Because the most important thing is the reason why. Like, if you can answer the question of why you're here doing what you do and then going out of here and then practicing and embodying the life of Jesus in your everyday, like, that's the core of what Jesus is trying to hit at. And right here is, he says, let's just read it real quick again. Beware of doing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them, otherwise you have no reward from your Abba, who is in heaven. Therefore, when you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be glorified men, for truly they have their reward in full. Because this is like a real problem of the heart of the people of God, like since God gave us like commands from the like very beginning, is improper motivation. In the book of Amos, chapter 6, he says Micah chapter 6 and verse 8. He says, what shall I come before Yahweh and bow myself down before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Is Yahweh pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give him my firstborn for my transgression, or the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? It's like, can I do all of these things? And it's like, it doesn't matter. He's told you, O man, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you but to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? One of Jesus' favorite verses in Hosea chapter 6. Hosea chapter 6. He says, look, I delight, God speaking here, he says, I delight in loving kindness, again that word, rather than sacrifice, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. It's like those acts of service, he's like, stop it if you're not doing it with the right motivation. And then it gets even more intense in the book of Isaiah, chapter 1. He says here, Isaiah, or Yahweh speaking here through Isaiah, and he says, this is Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 10, hear the word of Yahweh, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. What are your multiplied sacrifices to me, says Yahweh? I've had enough of burnt offerings, of rams, of the fat of fed cattle, of the blood of bulls, of lambs, of goats. I take no pleasure. When you come to appear before me, who requires of you this trampling of my courts? Bring your worthless offerings no longer. Incense is an abomination to me. The new moon, Sabbaths, calling of convocation, I cannot endure the wickedness of the solemn assembly. My soul hates your new moons and your festivals and your appointed times. They have become a burden to me, and I'm weary of bearing them. So when you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Indeed, even though you multiply prayers, I will not listen, for your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves and purify yourselves. Remove the evil deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Reprove the ruthless. Execute justice for the fatherless and plead for the widow. And he says, hopefully, that come now, let us reason together, says Yahweh. Though your sins are as scarlet, they will be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they will be like wool. And if you're willing and obey, you will eat of the best of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you'll eat of the sword will eat you. And for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. And then later in Isaiah, chapter 58, again, I said I don't have to turn to all of them, but we're spitfiring here. Do you hear the echoes of the teachings of Jesus in all of these? Or really, these are echoing in Jesus' teachings. Like, this is like a core, really important thing that is repeated. Like, we're just doing a sampling here. But Isaiah 58, we could go here later in the teaching on the Sermon on the Mount when he talks about fasting. But in verse 3, the people, they start to talk and they say, why have we fasted and you do not see? And why have we afflicted our souls and you do not know? And then Yahweh rebukes them because he says, on the day of your fast, you find your own desires and you oppress all of your workers. Behold, you fast for contention and quarreling and to strike with a wicked fist. You don't fast like you do today on the voice to make your voice heard on high. They've got the wrong reason why they're fasting. And he says, what is the fast that I choose in a day for the man to afflict himself? He's like, is it for the bowing of one's head like a reed, or for the spreading out of sackcloth as ashes on a bed? He's like, will you call this a fast, or even an acceptable day to Yahweh? And then he tells them what kind of fast that he wants. He's like, your fast is meaningless. It's worthless. Is not the fast that I choose to loosen the bonds of wickedness, to release the bands of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? And he said, if you do not divide your bread with the hungry, giving to the poor, and if you do not bring the afflicted homeless into the house, when you see the naked, you don't cover him, and you do not hide your face from your own flesh. He's like, if you then do these things, your light will break out like the dawn. You'll be like a city on a hill, like a lamp that's put on a lampstand. And your recovery will speedily bring forth, and your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of Yahweh will be your rear guard. He says, verse 10 of Isaiah 58, he says, and if you offer your soul to the hungry and satisfy the soul of the afflicted, then your light will rise in darkness, and your thick darkness will become like midday. Because you know what else that sounds like? The one who loses his life for his sake will find it. When we give of ourselves selflessly, when you offer your soul to the hungry, you actually find yourself in that. And that's like, I just realized as well that the last teaching I gave kind of ended it on a somber note, but oh well, we're ending this one on a somber note too. Sometimes, and that's how this Sermon on the Mount ends too, so I guess I'm in good company with that. But if we are doing worship here and living out lives for the wrong reasons, it's meaningless. It's worthless. God says it's abomination, it's a stench. It's like rotting flesh. And so, prayerfully, we need to go through this sermon and hear these words so that we do these things from the right place, for the right reason. And like that's the challenge of the, oh wait, my picture's gone, of the greater righteousness that we've already talked about in chapter 5. He's calling us higher, deeper, wider in the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Because that's a self-sacrificing way of living. That's a way of living that leads to your death. But in that, you find life in a strange upside-down way. That's the calling of the cross. That's the calling of the life of Jesus. It's the call of the Sermon on the Mount. And as we carry on through this sermon and through these teachings about the motivation for why we do what we do, it's just going to continue to just like slap us in the face. But it's good. It's a good thing to hear this, because this right here is the constitution of the Sermon on the Mount, of the constitution of the kingdom of heaven. And that's what we're all in right now. So tonight, if there's anyone here, that's a challenge for all of us. And then also it's a challenge for anyone who is not yet a child of the Father. So like, it begins tonight. Like you can hear his voice saying, I am well pleased, through an obedient submission to his will. And that's what the calling is tonight. If anyone here needs to respond to the call of this kingdom of heaven, to enter into the Christ through the waters, following him into his death and his resurrection, and the Father will look upon that and say, that's my child, and I'm well pleased. And if there's anyone, and for all of us who are in the kingdom, hear the challenge of the sermon tonight. Let's make sure we're doing things for the right reason, and that we're embodying the life of Jesus out and representing him to the world. If there's anyone who needs to respond tonight, would you please come as we stand and as we sing.